Let's talk now to Nigel Inkster. He's a former Director for Operations and Intelligence at MI6 and is now Director of Future Conflict and Cybersecurity at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. That is a think tank. Also, we can talk to Moazzam Begg. He's in Londonderry, British citizen who was subject to torture and sent to Guantanamo Bay detention facility. Moazzam Begg, can you tell our audience what waterboarding involves, please?
Yes, of course. Waterboarding is a technique that was first used during the Spanish Inquisition. In Spanish, it's called tortura del agua, which means water torture. And it essentially means a person being tied down with their hands, legs, head and arms, and water poured into their mouths and to their noses, and they get the sensation of feeling like they're drowning, even though they're not submerged. Just take that when you go swimming, for example, get water, a little bit of water in your nose. Imagine that for a sustained period of time, continuously. That's what waterboarding is. Japanese soldiers who waterboarded American GIs during World War II were prosecuted for war crimes and never be executed. So it's shocking that when the Bush administration came along and called it enhanced interrogation technique after his senior legal advisors, the Attorney General said that unless it's severe physical impairment, organ failure or death, it's not torture. Obama then reversed that, said that not only will we not torture again, we tortured some folks, and a result of that torture was unintended consequences of invading Iraq and ISIS.
Okay. Let me ask you, if I may, what kind of torture have you been subjected to?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm in Derry at the moment. I've been speaking alongside some of what's known as the hooded men who were tortured here. And there are 5 techniques that are mirrored and became almost a benchmark that we used later on during the War on Terror. And these techniques, they include sleep deprivation, food deprivation, stress positions, beating and torture, psychological torture as well. So
okay.
all of these.
And so was the sorry to interrupt, Mr. Begg. The result of that was what? Did you then tell your interrogators some information that until then you had kept from them? Did you then tell your interrogators what you thought they wanted to hear? What was the result of the torture? The result of the torture was I signed a confession, and that's, you know, recently the BBC made a film about that confession. It's the confession that I was a member of Al Qaeda because of the threats and the threats to my family, the physical torture that I endured and underwent, and because of the threats of being sent to summary trial to be executed. Okay. So that's the reality. Let me bring in Nigel Inkster, former Director for Operations and Intelligence at MI6. Do you believe torture works?
Well, in one sense, I think you can say, yes, maybe it does. If it didn't, people wouldn't use it. I mean, let's take an example.
Is the information you get from torture reliable?
Well, that varies. Let's take the case of Argentina during the Dirty War in the 1970s. How did the Argentine military crack the Montoneros? Every time they arrested somebody, they interrogated them, they tortured them. Once they'd got all the information out of them that they could, they would throw them out of the back of a Hercules over the South Atlantic. They did defeat the Montoneros, but at an awful cost in terms of a society that still bears many scars. From my point of view, to say that torture works is a bit like saying that slavery works as a model of economic production. It's not the conversation we ought to be having.
So what do you think of Donald Trump suggesting that waterboarding, the ban on waterboarding may be reversed?
He's rather cunningly qualified by saying that he would support the director of CIA and the defense secretary if they ask for it. Well, I know James Mattis by reputation. I mean, this is a thoughtful, educated man. When he went to Iraq, he brought with him 6,000 books to read. That's the kind of person he is. I don't know Mike Pompeo, but he comes across as a very intelligent and accomplished person. I would be very surprised if in CIA, the first thing they say to their incoming director is, we really need to get back to waterboarding and torture. Things have moved on a lot since then. And the way to deal with this problem of ISIS and Al-Qaeda is not by using this sort of techniques. in the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, this was a man who
was the mastermind of 9/11.
The mastermind of 9/11. This is a man who did have an awful lot of information that wasn't readily available. Now, if you capture detainees, they're operating on a cellular structure. They know very little. What you really need is good, comprehensive intelligence, good forensics that enable you to identify and prosecute the perpetrators of specific terrorist attacks, and intelligence that is preemptive. We're not so interested in what people were doing last week. What intelligence services need to know is what they're going to be doing next week, and the best way to do that is actually to get agents on the inside and to get across communication links.
Moazzam Begg, final thought to you. I mean, if the ban is reversed in terms of torture methods in the United States, could that backfire in terms of propaganda material for members of ISIS?
Two things quickly. First of all, yes, because you saw that ISIS dressed its victims in orange suits, and there were cases of allegations that ISIS members had waterboarded some of their captives. The other thing is, let's just look at 2003 invasion of Iraq. It was based on the torture of a man called Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, who was a CIA detainee held in the same place I was. He was sent to Egypt, where he gave a false confession that Al-Qaeda was working with Saddam Hussein on obtaining weapons of mass destruction. In 2003, Colin Powell took that information to the United Nations Security Council to argue for a case of war in Iraq, and the rest, I guess, is history. Okay. We invaded Iraq as a result of torture, and then as a result of that torture, we eventually got incrementally ISIS.
Thank you for your time. Moazzam Begg, a former Guantanamo Bay detainee, and Nigel Inkster, thank you very much, former Director for Operations and Intelligence at MI6.